This is not a bandsaw. This is a prototype. This is a proof of concept. This is something I built to get dimensions, to make mistakes, to quickly fix them and easily fix them with wood before I make this out of steel. I eventually want to make this out of steel, but this is my prototype that I'm making out of wood, just scrap wood I have lying around the shop, so I can make all the mistakes with this before I build the final version out of steel. I'll turn it on. It does run. I got to the point where it runs. It's kind of scary. There's a lot of things wrong with it, but it does run and track. It's a little bit frightening. It wobbles. Again, this was all just cobbled together. I built the initial frame in about a half an hour. And I just built it to get an idea of scale and size, and I said, okay, this is a good height, and does it fit under my heating ducts? Yes, and how big should it be, and where everything should be. And now when I build the final version out of steel later on, I can come back to this and say, okay, this is good, I want to make this arm a little bit longer, and where are the blade guides going to be? Some things I'm going to keep. I'll keep some of the tensioner parts. Everything else I'm going to make out of steel. The frame's going to be out of steel. I'll keep the wheels, and the wheels are the first thing I started with. When I wanted to build this, I'm like, am I going to find some bike wheels, or where am I going to get the wheels? And somebody suggested, oh, if only you had an old wheelchair. And I did. I had it in the garage. I had it in there for a bunch of years, and my wife's like, you should throw that out. And finally, I'm like, I knew I'd find a use for it. These wheels are exactly 20 inches, and I wanted to build a 20-inch bandsaw, so it worked out perfectly. A lot of times online you'll see, like Matthias and a lot of the people who have built their own bandsaw, this shaft in the middle is a big 1-inch steel shaft and a big bearing, you know, $60 in bearings or something. This is a 1/2-inch steel shaft. I think it'll be okay. The bearings look really good. There's 2 per wheel. I figure if it can hold up, you know, a 200-300 pound person, that means it can hold at least 150 pounds each wheel. And from what I've looked into, the tension on the blade and the wheels shouldn't be more than 100 pounds. Usually around 50 or 60 pounds, maybe 150. But I think I'm okay there. Now, like I said, this is all scrap wood. I didn't buy any of this wood. As you can see from this 2x4, it is completely warped and bent. And all these boards are old scrap boards that I had laying around. And I actually think that's good. I had to shim this. I had to put a bunch of these shims in here to get it aligned, and I figure if I can get this to work, if I can get this to track and the blade to stay on, it should be a lot easier when I actually build it out of steel and it's nice and straight and square. Again, the initial mock-up took me only like 30 minutes. I just screwed everything together. I had already drawn it on paper, but I wanted to actually see it. I didn't plan on actually building it to actually work. I just wanted to get an idea of size and everything. How high this should be, how long this should be, before I made it out of steel. Because if I welded it up and it's not right and I had to, you know, knock it back off and grind off welds, that'd be a lot of work. With this, if something's wrong, take off 2 screws, move something over, and it's done and it's fixed. If I don't like this, take it off, get another piece. When I make it out of steel, I want to know exactly what I'm cutting. I only want to cut stuff once and weld it once. Now you're saying, why should you make your own bandsaw? I have a table saw. I have an old 10-inch Craftsman table saw I've had for a decade. It's been great. I got it for $150 on Craigslist. You can buy some other tools pretty cheaply, but if you go look on Craigslist for bandsaws, it's insane how much they cost. Something like this, a junky little 9-inch bandsaw, they want $100, $200 on Craigslist. Any 14-inch bandsaw you see, $400 or $500. And forget about it, I was looking at a big Powermatic 26-inch bandsaw, $2,000, $3,000. So if you can make your own relatively cheaply, I'm planning on not spending more than $100. Right now I've spent $25 on a blade. It's actually a meat cutting blade. It was the cheapest one on Amazon. And a couple of the reviews said, yeah, it's just as good, some of those Grizzly $50 blades. So I think this was $15 and $8 shipping or something. I needed to know what size blade to buy. So when I mocked this up, I kind of measured it with a rope, and I figured, okay, it's a 38-inch blade, 140 if I adjust it. So things like that I'm mocking up, and I'm already answering questions before I make the final version. And I'm going to make it out of steel for a couple reasons. One, obviously it's either steel or wood, and like Matthias and a lot of people that have made it out of wood, it's a lot of work and it has to be right the first time. I figure I can make it a lot faster out of steel. If I buy a big 3 or 4 inch square steel tube to make this main frame, some of these bottom cross members, and weld that up with some struts, this thing should be super strong, relatively cheap. I'm going to buy all the steel from the same scrapyard I bought the steel for these other tool stands, and that only cost me 50 bucks for all this steel. I built 7 of these tool stands recently, and I already love them. They're really heavy. They're heavy duty. The bottom is made from a car rim. I got 7 car rims for 20, 30 bucks, and I got all the steel pipe and the steel plate for 50 bucks at a scrapyard. And so I built 7 of these stands for under 100 bucks, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty good. I think I should be able to get all the steel I need for this for under 100 bucks. Now it's going to be a little more expensive because it'll be, I think I'm going to buy 3 inch, 2 inch, and 1 inch square steel tubing, some angle iron, some sheet metal to cover it. But the tool stands are what gave me the idea and the confidence that I think I can make it out of steel. And this tool right here, my little strip sander, is what also kind of encouraged me, because when I built this, I wasn't sure I could make it. I wasn't sure I could get the sandpaper to track on there. And I remember the first time I built it, and it wasn't even a frame yet. It was just a motor, and I had stuff clamped together, and I was adjusting it with my finger, and I was getting that sandpaper to track on there. And when I saw it on there, staying on there, I'm like, I can build this. It's actually working. And this is just a little sander. It's good for what it's used for. But once I saw it working, I'm like, I can do it. And once I saw this blade on here tracking, I'm like, oh, I can build that. If it's working like this, I can build it out of steel and I can get it to work. Now it is going to require some welding like this did, a lot of welding, a lot of cutting with the oxyacetylene torch. But building those out of steel gave me the confidence that I think I can build this out of steel too. And now, like I said, I put this together in about a half an hour, the very first version, and I've kept on modifying it, changing it, adding supports, things like that. But most of the time has been spent right up here with the blade tensioner and tracking. The first version was just a board. I actually have it right here. That was version 1, just a board with the shaft for the upper pulley. Then I added 2 plates for tensioners just to see how much it actually had to move. I then threw this out, tried another version where I actually used the original hub off the wheelchair. I have all those parts still. And I thought this would actually, for tracking, I got rid of that. And the final version, which is mocked up out of wood, I'll make out of steel later, is much like all bandsaws, where there's outer guides, an inner box that moves up and down, and inside of that another mount that pitches back and forth for the blade tracking. And on the top I put a pulley, but originally it was just a threaded rod and a nut, but I made a little wheel for the tensioner up here, and there's a bolt on the back for tracking. And like I said, that took most, out of all the work here, that took about 80% of the time, is getting that to work right. But I'm glad I did it. I made all the mistakes in wood, and now when I think I make it out of steel, it should go much easier. Here again, let me turn it on. I'll have it's kind of frightening when it runs. I'll definitely have some guards when I build the final version. I'm not cutting anything without guards on it in case that blade comes off. And that is one concern, is these wheels, because they're from old wheelchairs, they're really convex. They're almost too convex. It should be basically flat with a little bit of convex shape on the wheel. These are really rounded over, and the blade kind of moves around a lot on there. So I'm going to kind of flatten them out and give it more surface area for that blade to run on. So let me show you some of the details on here. Here's the 9-inch pulley I have here. It's a 9-inch diameter, and the V-belt just rides in there. And I have a 3-inch pulley on a motor. And again, this is not the final motor. I think I'm going to attach it the way there was a metal bar that was attached. So these holes and brackets were already in there. So I might use this original plate. I might come up with something new. And again, here is the most complicated part of the build, which was this part right here. Again, these struts have moved, and I can quickly move them over, up. These supports, I can shim them, I can add stuff, so this is the thing that constantly was changing. So I have these outer rails right here, this inner frame right here that goes all the way up, and that's what lifts it off the upper wheel. And then inside is this piece, which is on a rod runs through here, and it rotates on this nut. So by tensioning that nut, that kicks the wheel for tracking. And you can see it tracks on that one and on the bottom one. And you could see when it was running, it wobbles, it's all over the place. Again, that's not the motor I'm going to use. It's just a motor I have lying around. I have some other motors. This one, I think, came off an old dishwasher or dryer or something like that. It's a 1/2 horsepower. I'd like to use this one. I think it has plenty of torque. It's 1725 RPM. I also have this motor, which is 2 1/4 horsepower. It's off an old treadmill. And a lot of people use this for a lot of things. I don't really want to use this one if I don't have to. I'd rather use that other motor. But this is definitely a lot more horsepower. And yeah, obviously I made the mistake with the sander. I don't want to make it with this. You have to make sure it's spinning in the right direction. This spins clockwise, this spins clockwise, the blade spins clockwise, cutting down. Don't make that mistake, otherwise you got to flip the motor on afterward. Now another thing is getting the pulleys and the motor right. Most motors are 1725 RPM or around there. They're written on the motors. And you have to know how fast you want this blade to go. Now, if it's a metal cutting bandsaw, you want 200-300 feet per minute. That's the units that this blade is traveling. They calculate it in feet per minute. For a wood cutting bandsaw, which I'm going to make, you want 2,000, 3,000. You can go faster or slower, but right around that 2,000-3,000 range. Feet per minute. So you have to, there's calculators online that will go from the motor speed to this pulley, to this pulley, to the wheel diameter, and that'll give you the feet per minute. So I have a 1725 motor, a 3-inch pulley, a 9-inch pulley, and a 20-inch wheel. And with this motor has 2 different speeds. I think I can alternate it between 2,000 to 3,000 RPM. So that's something else I wanted to check. And again, this thing wobbles because the V-belt's messed up, it's not right. These pulleys aren't exactly aligned correctly. But when I build the final version of this bandsaw, I'm going to make sure everything's really well aligned and it doesn't wobble as much as this does right now. Another thing I have is a whole bunch of really heavy-duty springs, and they're going to go up here on the blade tensioner. You don't want it rigid, you want some sort of spring. So I have, 4 different types of springs that I'm going to test out so that the tension is correct and the blade stays on the wheel with a little bit of spring. Another thing there's going to be a bunch of knobs on here on the back on the tensioner, and I printed out a bunch of patterns. I drew these up and I printed them out. I'm going to trace them out and cut them for on the back for the blade tracking and things like that. So I have those. That'll be made out of, those I'll make out of wood. I don't need to make those out of metal. Another important aspect is the blade guides. Now I have a bunch of these old skateboard wheels. Back when we were making fidget spinners with the 3D printer, and these are all 608, I think 608 ZZ bearings out of old skateboards and things like that. So I have, I don't know, a dozen of these, and I'm going to use 3 at the bottom guide and the top guide, and I'm going to make that frame out of metal, and they're just going to ride on these bearings, and that'll be another tricky little intricate thing that I'll make. So again, it's great building it out of wood because I've made mistakes and I've found what the tricky areas are. The blade guides are going to be tricky. That top tensioner and blade tracking is going to be tricky. Hopefully I have the frame down. I have all my dimensions and I can just measure, cut the steel, weld it up, and it should be good. I'm going to change this a little bit. I'll move this over and have a horizontal support. But overall, the size and height shouldn't change much. And I'm really happy building this. I'm happy I did it. Once I see it, I realize I can build it. Because I wasn't sure. I don't think I can build a bandsaw. But once you get to this point, and you get it where a blade will stay on there. You do have to fiddle with this tracking a lot. But once you get to this point, I'm like, oh, I can build that now. I already built it. I just have to make it out of steel and some other smaller parts, and it should be good. So once you get to this point and see it running, again, jumping all over the place. Once I get to this point and see it, I'm like, okay, now I just got to go find some cheap steel, go to a scrapyard, a junkyard, find some steel in somebody's trash. Again, it's going to have to be a big piece of steel for some of these frame pieces. I want to spend less than $100, and I think I can make my own bandsaw rather than go out and buy a one on Craigslist for $500, a smaller one. So this is step one. I think this will probably sit in the corner of my shop for a few months until I find the steel and the time to build the big bandsaw. But this is a huge step, getting to here and getting this working. All the thought, all the problems have already been solved. So when I build the final one, there won't be any big surprises. There'll be little surprises, but I've kind of already made my mistakes here. So again, mocking up for me is the way to go. I know I'm going to make mistakes when I build stuff. I'd rather make the mistakes with something cheap out of wood that I can fix and move, and just move brackets and add things, than out of steel, the final version. So hopefully I've made all the big mistakes, and when I ever do get around to building this out of steel, it goes really smoothly, and I have a bandsaw that'll last me the rest of my life. So I hope you like it, and please leave some comments and things I should look out for when I actually build the final version. But yeah, let me know what you think. Thanks.
Well, I hope you liked the video you just watched. If you did, feel free to subscribe by clicking the button on this side. You can also check out all the videos I've done, the playlist from things I've built, things I've fixed, home repair, 3D printing, and on this side you can check out a recommended video similar to the one you just watched. And as always, down in the description I'll put a link to my blog, which has more pictures and more information about the video you just watched. Thanks.